If I hear you, you sounds like you plan to reintroduce an economy-wide omnibus bill next year rather than going a la carte and trying to do utilities and do it in pieces. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think in the end, we have a responsibility to the rest of the world. Most of the CO2 is red, white, and blue, which is up there. You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You cannot tell China and India, you should stop, if the countries, along with the EU, that are most responsible for the creation of the problem continue to engage in the very same activities. So we need to have the moral and political platform from which to provide the leadership to the rest of the world and the alternative technologies that can be developed in those countries, deployed in those countries, which would substitute for the pathway which the United States went down. And so, yeah, I don't think we have an option. I think that we have to think comprehensively. I think the rest of the world would respond if we did take that leadership role. I think that the whole world wants the U.S. and China to partner in the 21st century. But until we begin to lead, we should have no expectations that China is going to follow. The head of the EPA during the first 6 years of the Bush administration, when the Republicans controlled Congress, the head of the EPA did not appear before the Energy and Environment Committee for 6 consecutive years. No one knew the name of the head of the EPA during the Bush years, and I won't embarrass you right now and ask you what the name was. But
Miller?
It was not Miller. But that's all right. That's good. That proves my point that it was the most successful witness protection program in the history of our country. So you run the Climate Run program here, and you don't know the name. And so what happened was
I was at a conference in Washington on renewable energy. They cleared the room of all the delegates when he came in and spoke. They kicked everybody out.
Yeah.
It was a closed session.
Right. Well, this Code of Omerta is one, of course, the Godfather Part 1 would appreciate. But on the other hand, you needed to have the issue be aired, to be talked about. And so the Supreme Court ordered that the EPA consider it. And then, unbelievable, the EPA administrator, Johnson, his name was? Yeah, that's it. It's like the duck coming down in the Groucho Marx show. Johnson, and determined that it was a danger. But Dick Cheney in the White House ordered the White House not to accept the email from the EPA. So the endangerment finding was never finalized. And so when President Obama was sworn in January, he instructed Lisa Jackson at the EPA to begin the process again. And so she, in 2009, determined that it was a danger. And from that moment on, it was no longer a question of legislation or no legislation. It was now a question of legislation or regulation, because the Supreme Court has ordered the EPA, if it finds it to be a danger, to regulate. So the head of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, has been saying all along, I would prefer for the Congress to pass comprehensive legislation that would then give instruction to the EPA as to how to act. And, by the way, the legislation allows for much more flexible mitigation of the harm to consumers, to regions, to industries, which EPA regulation would not make possible. But nonetheless, EPA is under a mandate to act. And so there's a kind of a delusional mentality that many opponents of dealing with greenhouse gases are operating with. There is going to be action. There is going to be something that happens. And I think ultimately that will drive them into the arms of those of us that want to do so comprehensively, but in a way which treats fairly all industries in America so they can make transitions for their companies and for their workers from the high carbon to the low carbon era.